in a lab. The company claims that 3 doses should provide some protection against the variant. It also showed that those who had previously had COVID and recovered demonstrated stronger immunity to the Omicron variant. While natural immunity comes at a cost, studies have shown throughout the pandemic that it works. Those who have recovered from COVID have significant protection from both catching the virus again and from the most severe symptomatic infections. While this is not always the case, and vaccination may improve immunity further, natural immunity is real. There are data to prove that. A study conducted in Italy showed that natural immunity is more effective than vaccines at reducing risk of future infection. Another study of 500,000 people in Denmark showed that natural immunity provides significant lasting protection against infection. Finally, a study from 3 separate hospitals in Israel found that natural immunity from a previous COVID infection was, quote, 27 times more effective than vaccinated immunity in preventing symptomatic infections, close quote. This, of course, is good news, especially considering that natural immunity is combining with vaccinated immunity in the general population. Recent data from the nationwide blood donor seroprevalence survey shows that almost 92% of Americans over the age of 16 have COVID antibodies from vaccination or infection. The vast majority of Americans have at least some protection against COVID-19. 92%. I believe the vaccines are generally safe and effective. I've been vaccinated, as has my family. I see these vaccines as a miracle, one that's helping protect many millions of Americans from the dangers associated with COVID-19. But I also recognize that millions of Americans are separately protected, separate and apart from anything else that might be there, from their as a result of immunity built up through their natural defenses, because they had previously contracted and then recovered from COVID. Now, the science shows that this immunity is strong, that it's effective, and that it's really widespread in America. Astoundingly, that information is not frequently shared in the media and never mentioned by the Biden administration. In fact, the administration makes no effort to recognize natural immunity in its mandates or in its formal guidelines. I've asked the Biden administration to provide clarity on its research on natural immunity, as well as meaningfully address the research being conducted by other countries that show natural immunity is strong and effective and valid. However, the Biden administration has yet to respond to my inquiries that I ask reasonably to be answered no later than the beginning of this week. Tragically, tens of millions of Americans have superior protection against the virus, even from new variants, and yet this administration would still fire them if they don't comply with the administration's mandates regarding vaccination. It is as irrational as it is cruel. I've heard from hundreds of Utahns who are worried about losing their jobs due to the mandate. They're just a few of the 500,000 workers who are at risk of losing their jobs in my state. There are 45 million Americans altogether who could lose their jobs due to this unconstitutional, illegal, and immoral overstep. The Senate thankfully recognized that these jobs were worth saving last night. 52 senators, including Democrats and Republicans, stood with American workers. Now, that resolution could, of course, fail in the House. It could, of course, be vetoed by the president. Nevertheless, regardless of that outcome, the Senate's statement last night rings loud and clear. Moreover, Mr. President, I hold out hope that the American people are being heard. They're being heard in the Senate, as evidenced by last night's vote. They're being heard in the House of Representatives, which will take up this measure in the coming days. I hold out hope that the House, too, will pass this measure, and I implore the President to consider allowing it to become law. But regardless of what else happens, these workers need immediate, real, lasting protection from the threat of the mandates. One way to have a significant portion of these jobs protected is to recognize the benefits of natural immunity. So today I'm offering a bill that would require that federal agencies recognize, accept, truthfully present, and include natural immunity in any regulation. This bill does not say that vaccines are bad or unhelpful. It merely asks the federal government to respect widely available science. I'm glad to be joined in this effort by Senators Braun, Tuberville, and Sullivan, who are with me as co-sponsors. This bill would keep Americans employed and help us beat the pandemic in a smart way. I urge my colleagues to support it. To that end, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions be discharged from further consideration of S. 2846, and that the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration. I further ask that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Mr. President.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
The senator from Washington.
Reserving the right to object. Unfortunately, even though the Senate has had multiple exposures to nonsense ideas like this bill, they keep coming back. Agencies like the CDC and NIH are already looking closely at the data on COVID-19 infection and natural immunity. They have been since the earliest days of this pandemic. In August, the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report, CDC actually assessed data from Kentucky and found that out of a group of people who had been infected with COVID before, those who were unvaccinated were twice as likely to get COVID again than people who were vaccinated. And a CDC report from October looked at multiple studies and concluded that vaccinating people who were previously infected significantly strengthened their immune response and reduced their risk from COVID. In other words, being unvaccinated puts you at higher risk of being reinfected, period. Getting vaccinated is a necessary step to protect you and to protect those around you. And now our agencies are focused on a new variant, as we know, that appears to be spreading quickly throughout the world, Omicron. We are in the middle of the deadliest pandemic in American history. It has killed 785,000 people and counting. If we are going to end this, if we're going to reopen our economy, if we're going to save lives, we need to get everyone vaccinated when they're eligible. We certainly don't need politicians suggesting they know more than the experts and ignoring the data. We don't need bills meant to weaken one of our strongest tools to get this thing behind us, like the one that the Republicans have repeatedly been pressing for. Workplace safety standards are nothing new in this country. Immunization requirements are nothing new in this country. And let's be clear, the emergency temporary standard OSHA has put forward specifically provides employers the flexibility to offer testing as an alternative to vaccination. Mr. President, people are dying every day. Families are scared, and they are tired, and they are angry that even as they try so hard to do the right thing so we can end this crisis, even after all the progress we've made to rebuild our economy and get students safely back in our classes, get people safely back to work, and get unemployment back to the lowest level since before this pandemic started, all that progress, all of our hard work, is at risk of being undermined by bills like this. Can Republicans please stop wasting our time trying to take us backwards and pretending they know more than the experts about this disease? Is that too much to ask? I think not. I object.
Mr. President.
Objection is heard. Senator from Utah.
Mr. President, it's important to remember that the fact that someone holds a government post and is an expert in a field does not make that person capable of making laws. Yes, there are lots of experts in our government. Some of them hold high bureaucratic or other executive posts. That doesn't mean that they may make laws. By operation of the Constitution, we are the experts for purposes relevant to making law. We are the only organ of the federal government that may make law. And so anytime someone starts to say, they're the experts, therefore they get to make the law, that's a problem. To call this a nonsense idea, to refer to this as an idea that wastes the time of the American people, ignores the plight of almost 45 million American workers whose jobs are being threatened right now. I'd add that my friend and distinguished colleague, the senator from Washington, has made an argument against this that doesn't match her conclusion. What she's stating is not that natural immunity makes no difference, although her conclusion would seem to suggest that. What she's saying instead...
Just take their conversation off the floor, please.
What she's saying instead is that someone who has had COVID and recovered, therefore developed natural immunity, could develop additional resistance to future infections by also being vaccinated. I understand this argument. In fact, it's an argument that I myself have used. I had COVID, I recovered from COVID, and I've been fully vaccinated. But the question is not whether you can gain additional protection from that. It's whether or not you can look at an original COVID infection from which someone has recovered and accept the fact that it offers at least a comparable degree of protection as one can obtain from a vaccine. So let's be honest about what we are and are not talking about here. We are talking about 45 million Americans whose jobs are being threatened as they head into the holidays at a time when economic conditions make that unusually intolerable. Intolerable as a result of many conditions that the federal government has itself put in place. In all events, this is really a bare minimum of what we can do for the American people. The burden should not be on them to prove why they should not be fired. Fired by a company being threatened by the President of the United States with crippling fines. This is cruel, it's barbaric, it's not authorized by statute or the Constitution, and in this circumstance, they're ignoring science. Thank you, Mr. President.
President.
Senator from Washington.
Mr. President, I rise this afternoon to request unanimous consent to move qualified, uncontroversial nominees from the HELP Committee. I ask unanimous consent that, notwithstanding Rule 22, the Senate proceed to executive session to consider the following nominations. Executive calendars number 300, 348, 349, 415, 416, 417, 418, 419, 420, 421, 422, 423, 424, 425, 426, 427, 484, 485, 569, 570, 571, 589, 590, 591, 592, 593, 594. That the nominations be confirmed, the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate, that no further motions be in order. The nominations, that any related statements be printed in the record, that the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action and the Senate resume legislative session.
Is there objection?
Mr. President,
Senator for Utah.
I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Senator from Washington.
Well, I'm sorry that we had an objection, because right now the HELP Committee has more than 30 nominees who are waiting on us to confirm them. These are qualified nominees, and they should be on the job and working, overseeing critical parts of the Departments of Labor and the Department of Education, leading independent agencies and serving in very important roles. We need to confirm them so they can get to work. on behalf of the American people, especially as we continue our economic recovery. If we are going to rebuild from this pandemic, we need all hands on deck. Many of the nominees that I just tried to move by unanimous consent were voted out of the HELP committee unanimously, and they have bipartisan support. But now my Republican colleagues are holding up all these nominations for manufactured reasons, and in some cases for absolutely no reason at all. That was, by the way, not our practice during President Trump's administration or any other administration, and it should not be the practice now. Obstructionism is not helping anyone. All this does is make it harder for departments and agencies to do their work, and harder for our families and our communities to get the help they need. It should not be this difficult for the Senate to perform its constitutional duty and confirm nominees who are qualified and supported by both Democrats and Republicans. Republicans are blocking or have delayed nominees who received support from every Republican on the HELP committee, nominees who receive support from bipartisan groups and who will serve in nonpartisan roles, and privileged nominees who are supposed to be fast-tracked through the Senate as part of a long-standing bipartisan practice, and that, by the way, includes a former colleague of ours, Dennis DeConcini. Every one of these nominees have gone through the full process and cleared the HELP committee. Mr. President, I am extremely frustrated that Republicans have blocked nominations despite their clear qualifications. The history of fast-tracking nominations like this in a bipartisan way, and most importantly, the critical challenge we're facing and the work that families are counting on all of us to get done. And they've been blocking several other critical, non-controversial nominees my colleagues have been pushing to confirm as well. We hear plenty of excuses from across the aisle, but all we know is there is no good reason for this. We know these are qualified nominees. We know the work they are being blocked from doing is important if we're going to rebuild our nation stronger and better. And I want my colleagues across the aisle to know we're not going to give up on this side. We are going to keep pushing to get these nominees confirmed so they can do their jobs and get to work for the people and the communities of this nation. Thank you very much. I yield the floor. And I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.